startups. So it's going to come up, and some of the IFI also wants to do some startup. But Sunref, for example, we're kind of limited with the two banks, like what they're willing to do in terms of risk. And startup has always been something extremely difficult, unfortunately.
So I have a question. How do you collect the data? How do you actually know where are women in that space? Because the International Renewable Energy Agency does surveys of their members. And it's a very, very important knowledge that is needed, that we actually need to know, are women benefiting from all this financing? So can you just give us an insight how you collect the data?
Okay, I mean, in terms of impact of the loans, in terms of social impact of the loans, for Sunref, we're doing it a little bit, but we'll do it more for the other credit line. But basically, it is based on interviews with the companies, on visit, on understanding their business model, what they're doing, and on analyzing the project. So if it's like an additional production level, for example, for some of what we're doing on the renewable energy, we have gender experts, we have environmental and social experts. So as an engineer, I'm not too sure exactly, but I mean, I know that there are the experts, and they come in, they meet with the company, they understand the market a lot more than me in terms of social impact. They do their analysis after interviews and discussion about their numbers and their production and who's working for that company and what they're producing, how is it going to impact the different gender. So they're the one doing that, but that's not that sort. As a public? Oh, ew. No. It's each genre, I'm not sure they will share those.
Well, I'm just going to do one more, and then we go to the next session. Okay, two more. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I see your vision is to invest in the success of the world energy transition. How are these gender assessments and frameworks inculcated within your own business? And how often do you then subject yourselves as an organization to the frameworks that you subject your clients or your partners or your stakeholders, number one? And then number two, how are they incorporated within your performance management system? Issues of gender, because I think that it is quite important as well. I had two questions, but let me allow.
As my organization, as Sunref, or as my company?
Both, actually. I'll challenge you to that.
Yes.
I mean, you can look at my company online if you want, and you'll see that. I think our employee mix is 70% women, 30% men, or like 65 for 33. It's just like the way that the different work that we're doing. A lot of engineers, and in Canada, I mean, I don't know why, but we have like a lot of women. I mean, the mix that we have, and in terms of ownership of the company is the same, it's 50-50. So as a company, it's not that I'm not going to tell you that we've been focusing on the gender equality. It's just that we've been hiring the best people that we could, and we end up hiring more women than men for like a couple, like different, like many of the position. And it's not. I mean, we're mostly engineers and professional staff. So we work. I don't know. We're pretty. It's nice for us because it's. I mean, I'm surprised about it sometimes, but it's because we didn't put any kind of work on it or any focus. It just happened that way. I mean, it was mentioned earlier, it's all about like the equal opportunities.
Okay, so, sorry, just as a last one, in terms of final decision making, I mean, it's great, congratulations, but in terms of final decision making, are those women on average, or male, or an equal representation?
Equal because we have like a director board, for example, right? I'm the director of the international group, and we have a director of the national group, we have different groups at the company, and it's half and half. So, of course, like for my group, I'm the one making the decision, but for the other group, some of them are women-owned, like women directors. So it's a mix of, we all have our groups and our different decision for the different channels that we have, or group that we have.
Okay, the last
Sorry,
one I
sorry,
promised.
sorry,
Best practice
sorry,
in terms of
sorry,
the frameworks
sorry,
that you use.
sorry. Please go ahead. I mean, when we close, you can always see him. Yeah.
We reach out. I mean, some of them. I mean, I'm pretty sure I don't know all of them, and probably this is something that we need to work on for the next couple of months because the summer program is still running for another year. We were not working with Tech House. We were working mostly with company association, like industrial association, for example. We were working with the Renewable Energy Association, the Solar Companies Association, so those kind of tech companies association mostly. This is how we reach out to the market. What is the association ASI, like the association of or AGI Ghana Industries, and we did like road shows with them, going in different cities. So we were working mostly with them. So the Tech House, no, for sure I would be interested. I mean, to do like more promotion and reach out to them more in the future. As I said, we're going to do more marketing and promotion and road shows in the next couple of months, so that would be something to discuss. Okay, we'll talk then.
Good advertising time. Thank you very much. It's time to go to the plenary and to discuss integrating gender consideration into energy transition processes and outcomes with a focus on and learning from multinationals and multi-stakeholder cooperation partnerships. You ready to introduce your panelists? Great.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Plenary 5, where I'm going to invite panel members Rosemary Idem, Dr. Isavani Necker, sorry if I've mispronounced that, and Professor Nana Ama Klutzer. So I'm very honored to invite you to the stage, where we'll be talking about integrating gender considerations into energy transition processes and outcomes, with a particular focus on and learning from multinational and multi-stakeholder cooperation partnerships. We have 3 speakers, and then we will follow that with a short video, and then we'll make sure we have time for questions. So, panel members, are you ready? So, first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Rosemary Idem. She's Acting Program Manager for Women at the Forefront at Sustainable Energy for All. And she's going to introduce herself and talk for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we will have Dr. Isavani Necker, founder of Eve Sites in Amsterdam and senior advisor for the Science for Africa Foundation in Nairobi. And then we'll be moving on to Professor Nana Ama Klutzer. Again, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, from the Department of Physics at the University of Ghana. And then finally, as I mentioned, there will be the video from Isabella Schmidt at UN Women, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, but has prepared a really interesting video, which I do hope you'll enjoy. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Rosemary.
Thank you, Deborah. My name is Rosemary Dem. I lead SE for All, which is Sustainable Energy for All's work in ensuring that gender and youth perspectives are embedded in SDG 7 policy and implementation. Our work also covers creating an enabling environment to foster increased access to professional development and economic opportunities for women and young people in the energy sector. To start off, I want to reiterate a point that one of the speakers made earlier, which is that energy accounts for 2/3 of global GHG emissions, and to tackle the climate crisis, there's a strong need to decarbonize energy systems, which means transitioning away from fossil fuels to cleaner energy sources that emit low emissions in order to save the planet. And in light of that, we all know that most recently many African nations have also joined the global effort in making net zero commitments to put their countries on the clean energy pathway. And this also involves tackling the multiple challenges they face in order to tackling the multiple challenges they face in order to sorry about that. Tackling the multiple challenges they face in order to meet their climate ambitions, which include ending energy poverty, lifting the people out of poverty, and as well as achieving the SDGs. So in light of that, I want to shed some light on the importance of international and inter-institutional cooperations and partnerships in ensuring that gender perspectives are integrated into the energy transition planning processes. To start off, I want to more or less highlight 3 key messages in stating my point. The first is that gender equality is essential in achieving energy transition. What this means that gender equality is not just a social justice issue, it is imperative and is required for achieving an inclusive energy transition process where nobody is left behind, including gender dimensions in the planning and implementation of these processes ensures that diverse perspectives are taken into consideration in integrating and implementing these plans globally. A second key point I wanted to make is about multinational and multi-stakeholder partnerships, such as energy transition and investment plans, which are catalysts for change. By energy transition investment plans, these are plans that lay out how a country intends to build out energy systems that helps them achieve their net zero goals, as well as their social and economic development. This is the approach that SE4All uses in supporting countries in developing their energy transition objectives. Currently, SE4All is currently supporting Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Barbados in mapping of their net zero pathways. And we see that these plans, because they capture not just the technological needs, but all the financial and all the resources needed for the country to, one, achieve their energy goals, but also keep their economies competitive. Our approach to that process is ensuring that these plans are a holistic, whole economy approach. So in terms of developing the energy models for delivering these plans, we take into consideration things like GDP, population growth, the country's revenue sources. We look at data from different sectors of transportation, building, energy, their energy use needs, their hard-to-abate sectors. We see this as a unique opportunity for stakeholders to key into the process and ensure that gender is mainstream throughout not just the energy sector, but the whole economy, because that's the best way to close the gender equality gap. So taking that approach, it means that you have a chance to pull together diverse voices and perspectives from the government, civil societies, academia, DFIs, which gives you the opportunity to leverage different types of resources available to you to ensure that gender perspectives are holistically integrated into an economy. The third point I want to raise is data and learnings. Disaggregated data is crucial in understanding the gender gaps and how it impacts women disproportionately to other groups. And currently in the sector, that is an area that is still struggling because people are collecting data in different ways and people are analyzing and defining these indicators in different ways. So it's really difficult to understand how energy is impacting women. I know that from an example is that most data sources are quoted in terms of gender equality are more focused on things like the workforce and maybe cooking, but there's a bigger ecosystem out there, and it's good to understand how these issues in climate and energy issues impact women in terms of education, economic mobility, areas like healthcare. So learnings and data from multi-stakeholder corporations, partnerships are essential in understanding these gaps, as well as providing the information needed to develop evidence-based policy frameworks, interventions, initiatives that will actually help us move the mark in gender equality. So, catch my breath, I'll stop here. But I want to leave you one thing, that one, data is essential in more or less understanding the dimensions of the problem. Gender integration is essential in ensuring that we have an inclusive, sustainable energy transition that leaves no one behind. So thank you. Back to you, Deborah.
Thank you. We're going to wait for questions at the end, so I'm going to hand over now to Isivani.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this panel. I have a presentation, but I just wanted to start with something that occurred to me as I'm listening to the presentations, but thinking about us talking about a just energy transition, but in many countries. And I'm looking, because I probably see Diab in front and my countrywomen from South Africa, where we are facing not just the challenges of a transition, but challenges of access to energy right now and managing the system. And it actually brings me back to something that when I was, I started off as a geologist, and one of my good friends at university was an electrical engineer who became at a very early, a woman, one of the first women to be employed by Eskom and the demand side management. And it was really interesting. This was in the 90s, where she was saying that Eskom has a problem because they're not maintaining a lot of their plants. And it's interesting that, you know, I think when we're talking about the just energy transition, we also have to look at maintaining and developing the energy system in Africa, because I think our development states in Africa are much lower than in other parts of the world. And I think this is both a challenge, but also an opportunity to leapfrog some of the systems that have been developed elsewhere and go to renewables, but also an acknowledgement that we do need to fix some of the systems. And I think I wanted to just then go to the African Common Position on the Energy Access and Energy Transition acknowledges this, that it states that Africa will continue to deploy all forms of its abundant energy resources, including renewable and non-renewable energy, to address energy demand. And I think this is really important for us to recognize context matters when I'm going to my presentation about the lessons and challenges, which I was asked to pick on at the end. I think this is really important for us to understand that the context in Africa is important, and that this transition must be just, fair, and equitable in Africa is very, very important, more so than in other parts of the world. And it needs to close the gap, both in terms of income and welfare of people living in the continent, between the region, between women and men, and between the different classes, but also within countries, between different regions, the urban and the rural. And for us to converge within Africa across these great divisive, but also I think opportunities that exist because of this diversity, but also how then that fits within this global convergence to the European New Green Deal, the rest of the world, and their transition to the just energy. And I think this is really, really important. And yesterday we had someone speaking from the United Nations University, and actually Professor Fatima Denton is currently a Prins Claus chair at the university in the Netherlands, looking at just this topic. And I think it's really important that Africans, women, but all of us start to critically, and I think this is very important, critically engage with what this just energy transition looks like, and that's what she's going to be looking at. And when, counting the million, or close to 1 billion people in Africa who do not have access to clean energy for cooking, millions who do not have access to electricity at all, we really need to realize that the continent is carbon neutral, and this is not a good thing necessarily. We need to actually develop it, but how do we do that in convergence with these global commitments that the world has made, but also recognizing that the world has also developed in the phase where we weren't committed to the SDGs, including access to energy. And so the concept of an energy transition must be adapted in the African context to our realities, and specifically in the context of what this summit is talking about, gender, also the inequalities, not just between Africa and the rest of the world, but of the role of women in various of the systems that are necessary for us to transform and rethink, so that we include, and this includes the research and innovation system for inclusion of women more in a more real way, in what we spoke about earlier, about small to medium enterprises, entrepreneurship, where women are included in a more real way, but in leadership positions within these various organizations that are taking, and I think it's important not just to include women, and I like what you said, that you don't have to do it, it needs to be merit-based, but also recognition that when you bring women into these positions, they have a different way of problem solving, they have a different way of, and I think this is really important to look at. They bring various key critical skills and a kind of way of looking at solving these problems that is needed when we're looking at world problems generally, but specifically in the context here looking at this energy transition. And in this context, in developing one aspect of it, I am here representing both my company, EviScience, which is looking at evidence and insights of actionable policy making across various areas, including the just energy transition, but also I'm sitting here as a senior advisor, policy and partnerships for the Science for Africa Foundation, which is there to support African scientists in addressing the African continent's most pressing challenges and development needs by generating knowledge through quality science and problem solving, and also by making knowledge and evidence to inform decision making and enabling these policymakers. I did ask him to put up a slide on the new vision. It's a public, not-for-profit charitable foundation based in Nairobi, which is working across the continent through various programs, both in innovation and research and innovation, funded through multiple multilateral partners, but also seeking to work in partnership with African governments, both within the countries where the researchers who are funded are based. And one of the flagship programs is the DELTAS program, Developing Excellence in Leadership and Training for Science in Africa, which phase 2 was launched in March this year, and 2 of the new phase of projects are looking at this intersection of climate change with health in one instance, but in the next phases it will be really important to look at energy. But it's really, I think, when we're talking about a just energy transition, we're not just talking about energy, it's looking about the intersections of this climate change with other developmental challenges that we're facing on the continent. And one of them is the main issue that we're facing is health. So quite a few of the programs are focused on health, but importantly, the 3 pillars of the foundation are focused on agriculture, health, and climate change and the just energy transition. But now let me go quickly to this integrating gender perspectives into research on energy and decarbonization policies in Africa, and what are the lessons that we can learn. And I wanted to just then dwell on this for a moment. We need to recognize that gender disparities in access to energy decision-making and power dynamics and employment opportunities in the energy sector need to be approached in a gender-responsive way. And this requires a focus on intersectionality. And this was mentioned by various speakers yesterday, but I think it's something that I would like to come back to this morning, and which I think really is the crux of the matter, that we need to acknowledge that gender intersects with other social identities such as class, ethnicity, geography, and we need to consider how these intersections shape energy needs, vulnerabilities, opportunities for different groups of women and men and across those other divisions that we spoke about. That context is important. I mentioned this earlier, that we need to understand that the local context, the local cultural, social, economic factors that influence these gender dynamics in energy transition, and recognize that gender roles, norms, and expectations vary across African countries and communities. Don't want to dwell on that too much, because I know that if this conversation on gender was occurring in Europe, there would also be that element of a transgender, which we are not approaching here, but that's because of a specific context. But I'm not going to force that in here, but then we also have to recognize that there are certain systems within the continent that we live in that are oppressing some of these other gender identification or choices. So context does matter, and when we're looking at this just energy transition, I think it really needs this intersectionality so that we don't just focus on one aspect. And how do we do that? I mean, we're not going to try to do that, but I think in Africa, I think we're at a stage sophisticated enough to basically be able to do that without fear. And I think that's also part of the issue. So what are the opportunities? Empowering women. We need to engage and empower women as active participants, not just at the end, but also in the design, implementation, monitoring of energy policies and projects. That's very important in making sure that at that stage, but also in the research and innovation stage, by providing these capacity building opportunities for enhancing women's skills and leadership in the energy sector across the various areas. We need innovative financing mechanisms that look at exploring these innovative financing models, including blended financing from public sector, from private sector, and from multilateral, that such as providing, and then also providing microfinances for women-led clean energy enterprises, and promoted inclusive access to finance for women in rural areas. And I think that's really important as well, that there's small-scale women-led projects in rural areas that really need to support it. The other is data collection and analysis is really important for monitoring, to improve the data collection and analyze the systems that capture this gender disaggregated data, so that these programs don't just make claims, but this is backed up by evidence. I think this is really important to on what is the information on energy access, energy use patterns, and the impacts of energy policies on these different gender groups. And this would enable evidence-based decision-making and actionable policy making that is targeting interventions that impact on women and others in those fragile communities. So the challenges that we do have limited gender expertise, and this is being developed by various people sitting in this room and outside. Insufficient gender expertise within the energy sector can pose a challenge to integrating these gender perspectives, and we need to address this by investing in training programs, partnerships, and collaborations to build gender capacity amongst researchers, policymakers, and energy practitioners. This is what I'm trying to do both in my role at the Science for Africa Foundation, but through EVISITES, the startup based in Amsterdam. And what we need to also then come back to is there are deep-rooted cultural, social norms that may perpetuate gender inequalities in the energy sector, and overcoming these requires engaging with local communities, very importantly, starting to not speak for them or on behalf of them, but with them, and raising awareness and promoting dialogue to challenge these discriminatory norms and stereotypes that exist. And we need to then address policy implementation gaps to ensure that gender-responsive policies and frameworks are effectively implemented and monitored, because as we know, I mean, my experience working as a policymaker in South Africa, but also now in Europe, is that really there are some very good policies, but implementations of these policies can sometimes be a challenge. And we can't stop at producing evidence-based, actionable policymaking. We really need to make sure that the relevant stakeholders, including government, agencies, civil society organizations, and the private sector, ensure policy coherence and accountability on implementation of these policies that are developed, that we need to make sure that the data gaps are filled, that we need this availability of gender disaggregated data on energy use to become available, and learning from all of these lessons and leveraging the opportunities, significant opportunities. I think we often talk about the challenges in Africa, but I think, I mean, the youth dividend, I think when you travel globally, you realize that, you know, there are amazing amount of people from Africa or of African descent that have a huge amount to contribute to solving the challenges. And so this is an opportunity for how do we tap into that, and how do the researchers, policymakers integrate these people, but also gender perspectives into research on the energy transition and decarbonization policy. And this integration that will then ensure that Africa speaks with a unified voice in this just energy transition for Africa's development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very powerful finish. I'd like to move on to Mananama, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Deborah, for the opportunity, and thanks to you all for your presence. I will take my time, and on the topic for our panel, I picked keywords: gender, energy transition, cooperation, co-creation, climate change, community. Talk around these key points, if I may. Thank you. So, energy supply contributes to a whopping 60% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. The IPCC has also warned that this trend could get to 80% by 2050. I am also Ghana's representative on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So I represent Ghana on IPCC. I'm also a lead author in the Set Assessment Report of the IPCC. So if I'm making these quotes, you may have to permit me. It's a worrying trend that the current energy supply contributes about 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And it will go higher, looking at the trends by 2050, to about 85%. Meanwhile, only about 17% of the energy consumption is now met with renewables, which means that we are doing much less on renewable energy. So the 83% are coming from fossil fuel and probably nuclear but we can also agree that a lot more of this 83% of the energy consumption is coming from fossils. We, however, need to meet the target of access. How will you think that a whole country like South Africa will struggle with access to energy? We need to meet access. We need to meet the target of affordability. We need to have reliable, sustainable, and modern energy by 2030. We are in 2023, so we have just 7 years. And I see people shaking their head. We cannot meet this. Even for access, we're struggling. So the question again comes to what are we doing to achieve this goal? Now we have just 7 years to meet 2030. We have talked, I believe, a lot. We have discussed many solutions, and we've seen implementations of some of the discussions and actions. But are we doing enough? Have we reached our maximum capacity in providing solutions? Have we scratched our heads enough? Have we done all we have to do in trying to achieve this? We've come a long way. We believe also that governments have improved access in many countries. They continue to do so in improving access. We still have a big challenge of affordability, and this is where the gender disparity comes in. How are we going to provide solutions to affordability, to energy for all? So, as my colleague said, we cannot talk about energy in isolation. There are so many factors that come into play here. Economic situation is very strong when we are dealing with energy. Collaboration also becomes imperative, and we need to leverage on our strength from different countries during these discussions and how to provide solutions through collaborations. When one country has the resources, another may have the space, others may have human resource. So we definitely need to leverage on our strength in providing solutions to these challenges. Now, this planning and implementing sustainable energy transition must involve all, of course, men and women, and these has been the discussions from yesterday and today. But research tells us that women-led initiatives and projects are successful in the energy space, especially sustainable energy solutions at the community levels. And these are the micro spaces that renewable energies are more effectively used, and I would say sustainably used, other than the industrial level. So we need to encourage startups or initiatives at the community level where renewable energies are being implemented. We know also that there are a lot of initiatives that are struggling, but I'm happy to have heard from Mr. Nomad, his company. In fact, at my level, I'm hearing about his company for the first time. So I can imagine a woman starting a new project or company on renewable energy, how to hear about companies that are even ready to support such. So we also have this other effort to make in advocating for where women or initiatives in general on renewables, especially at the community levels, can get support in becoming successful or providing solutions at that micro levels. So we see that there is a disconnect we need to deal with. There are quite a number of such companies I've heard, but we need to work on the advocacy as well. My other point is on co-creating solutions, and I'm passionate about this particular, I would say, word co-creation, because we have a lot of products in the system, but most of them do not get used, or they get used once and they get dumped down somewhere. There are many products in Africa for renewable solutions. I have a question. Have you talked of you, a typical Ghanaian, losing a taste of a smoked fish to a fish that is, let's say, roasted or done in another way? So you thought of, you're not going to eat smoked fish again. And this is particular in the rural community. I've seen a fishing community that got a stove or no, oven built for them. And so the idea is that they shy away from firewood for smoking fish, and use a modernized oven which uses solar panels or solar-powered energy. So instead of getting the fish smoked, you get it roasted. So the community, I think, made an attempt in using the oven, and after probably the first few rounds, they dumped the oven with reasons. One, that such roasted fish do not last. It doesn't have taste. It doesn't get sold in the market. It's new. So co-creating solutions, I believe, will help resolve such challenges. I was on a panel, I think Elizabeth you were the one actually asking questions in last February. You were the moderator for the panel when we did the Genesis session where European Union was available. So there was a question of getting solar stoves for Africa, and how will the rural communities embrace such technology at that level. And of course, at the first hearing of it, everybody will be happy, everybody will want to receive something, especially if it's for free. But then, think about your mother, whose preoccupation has been going to the farm to fetch firewood, come home to cook at a particular time of the day, and feed the house. Then the next moment, yes, there's solar stove. So you put the firewood aside, or you put the charcoal aside and use the stove. If they get good enough education on the use, they will use it for a while. But I assure you that that life of going to fetch firewood from the farm will be missed. And most rural communities, I come from a village, so I have that experience. Most rural communities will want to go back to that lifestyle. Yesterday, on the panel discussions, it came up strongly about clean cooking and how much time children and women will save in doing other things. It is true, but people's lifestyle and cultures are not easy to change. So co-creation, I will insist, and I said I'm passionate about it, is very important in this discussion. We need to work out the solutions. They may be good, but they may not be used because of different cultures and probably perceptions around the products. We have gender challenges. We need to be deliberate about bridging the gap, especially getting more women on board. We know the challenge is such that we don't just have females in the space of energy providing the solutions, and also, of course, women get more affected on the energy challenges. So if you are the only woman in a room, like we had it yesterday, said by, I've forgotten her name, in a group, and the rest are all men, why don't you take the responsibility of bringing in another woman and getting more women? If you are the only man in a group, why don't you take it upon yourself to step out there to bring some women? In fact, not just bring, encourage, convince, because this is an area that is seen as men or masculine dominated. So, which means that every effort we make need to be deliberate, need to be a little bit more radical than we are doing now. So we need to encourage other women and probably convince other women or females that it's a space that belongs to all and also belongs to women. I will end it here. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a video from Isabella Schmidt, but what I would like to do is to use the time while you're on stage to invite questions from the audience to our contributors here, and any final statements as well that you would like to make. So, first of all, do we have any questions from people in the audience? Don't be shy. Well, perhaps I can start then by asking each of you to give me one headline from your talk and any direct action that you would like to see as a result of the work that you're doing. So keep it just brief, if you don't mind. Just some statement that you would like the audience to take away. Rosemary, can I start with you?
Thank you. For me, I would say integrating gender dimensions in energy policy programs and infrastructural development initiatives ensures that we address the gender gaps and priorities that affect men, women, and other minority groups. So if I'm leaving anyone anything, is that the time is now when countries and like even private sector are embarking on developing their net zero plans. So this is the right opportunity to key into that process and also affect change, because I don't think there's any other time like this where people are at the planning stages, and it's important to be intentional about it and direct the right resources, financing, to make targeted interventions that will help close the gender gap. Thank you.
I think starting with the individual, how that then goes from the individual to your community, national to global. The I in inequalities, addressing the inequalities that exist, intersectionality, acknowledging intersectionality of just energy transition with gender and a whole range of other issues, and innovation. How do we innovate to address the problems and challenges that we face and harness the abundant opportunities that exist within the African context, and working in collaboration with our partners globally and also within the continent, again, in partnership starting between men and women.
Thank you. I'll still focus on the women. We know that the energy challenges affect women more, and women need to be part of the solutions, same as co-creation. So we need to be more deliberate and, in fact, radical in getting women involved along the energy value chain, all along. So throughout, at every stage, we need to have women, enough women who contribute at all stages through the energy value chain. Thank you.
great. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the speakers here. I'm sure there will be time during the break afterwards for you to ask questions. So thank you once again, and we will now have the video from Isabella, if Joshua, if you're able to show that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm currently in Nairobi and happy to join you for this very important gender summit on just energy transition, as well as how climate change is affecting women, men, girls, and boys. So my presentation is particularly going to look at intersectionality and how, from a data and statistics perspective, we can approach this when we consider the energy transition. I'm also going to share with you a few examples from the field, as well as the kind of support that we've developed for this particular type of gender data and analysis. So as you know, we as UN Women monitor the gender response of SDG indicators, and beyond SDG 5, of course, most of the other goals have at least some indicators that are disaggregated by sex, and there are actually some that need to have indicators disaggregated by sex and do not have them. But what we know at this point is of the 122 gender responsive indicators that we monitor, only 40% are available in Africa. And then even as basic as indicators that should be disaggregated by sex, there's also quite a lot of data gaps, where we see that 21 have no data for any countries, or 21 have recent data, 3 have old data, and 8 have no data for any of the countries that are supposed to report on it. So why would the SDGs be of importance, and what are we particularly looking at when we consider the energy transition, especially a just energy transition? As you know, I think many delegates would also share these perspectives. Field choices in Africa, particularly energy choices, are very location specific and also bound to your socioeconomic group. With poorer communities, more disadvantaged than others, relying heavily on solid and fossil fuels. And as you know, both these fuel types have significant negative factors that impact particularly on women and girls. We are thinking here of health risks that are posed by the fumes of these fuels. We are thinking about gender-based violence risks for girls and women who collect wood in isolated areas. We know that the bulk of the unpaid domestic and care work are carried by women and girls, and some of that is actually time spent collecting wood and water rather than on other productive activities that could have advanced the household socioeconomic position. So in addition to all those examples, which in many countries primarily affect rural women, we know that women are not equally benefiting from the technological transition to different forms of energy. And particularly we are looking here at solar power, which may in certain programs be offered, but the uptake is usually amongst men. When we look at climate change, we know that climate change will be impacting on agricultural production. The question is, will women have equal access to the technology needed to mitigate that? And then finally, there are not enough women and girls in STEM. And we know that as innovations in this field are increasing rapidly, having women around that table, both as innovators and drivers of change, will significantly change not only the solutions that we develop, but also how we ensure that women benefit from those innovations. So we know that when we look at data and statistics, we often deal with national averages, we say X percentage of women and Y percentage of men participate or benefit in X, Y, and Z. And it's quite evident that we increasingly have to look at it with a more gendered and a more intersectional lens, where we do not consider women as a homogeneous group, but we do intersectional analysis, realizing that women of different age groups, children, youth, persons with disability, older persons, all these different subgroups have different needs, and their space in the development continuum looks different. The solutions that will address their problems are also going to look different. And without this kind of fine-grained analysis of what's happening to marginalized groups in general, but when we look at the gender agenda, women with different multiple intersectionalities, we are not going to reach our targets in the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are also not going to increase the effectiveness of our interventions aimed at gender equality and women's empowerment. So this is just a snapshot that shows you what happens to the completion of secondary education statistics when we begin to disaggregate by age. And we are looking at the poorest rural group and the richest urban group, which is the gray dots. Poorest rural group is the orange group. And here we can see at a glance in these countries in Africa where this analysis was done, that there is a significant difference as soon as you begin to analyze by location and by socioeconomic status. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there isn't a one-size-fits-all interventions for women in any country because of these differences between different subgroups of women. So we believe the intersectional links is very important because it will improve the way in which we target our campaigns, design our programs and policies so that we can reach more marginalized populations. Doing that, we can close gaps to ensure that the most marginalized are included and benefiting from the energy transition and climate change mitigation programs and projects. So here we have an example of a woman hoeing her land by hand. We know that there are technological innovations, for example, around irrigation, which is done manually in these kinds of situations. That may actually save women time and increase the efficiency of their agricultural production. When we look at climate change, there may be an increased need for irrigation as rainfall deteriorates and declines in certain parts of Africa. And there again, are women able and ready to embrace the technological changes that this will bring about? We know, for example, that women with disabilities are at a 3 times greater risk of experiencing rape than women who do not have disabilities. And they are also twice more likely to be survivors of domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. And so here we see, again, an example of where simply looking at women as a group does not help us to really identify who of these women are more marginalized and need specific types of interventions. We, for example, also realize that in many instances, the sample sizes of surveys that we do are too small to adequately capture the differences between women with disabilities and those without. And so there are huge data gaps if we begin to realize and try to provide the data necessary to talk about subgroups of women that are more marginalized than others. So in Zimbabwe, for example, we see that people who are referred to projects are referred to the support programs through the police, court referral system. And the practical assistance that they get could actually be widened and made more efficient if we have sufficient data to locate where pockets of people are that need particular kinds of support. Again, from the gender-based violence scenario, we are talking about being able to physically change the way we do sample surveys by targeting areas that have high prevalence rates of gender-based violence. And in so making scarce resources for data collection go further by saying, yes, we know that this is a problem across the country. We have limited resources. Let's take a deep dive into these and these areas where we know this is a more pervasive problem than elsewhere. So UN Women has developed various tools to assist the producers of gender data and statistics. And one of them that particularly look at increasing support for more disaggregated data analysis is our toolkit, Counted Invisible. And this particularly look at how in household surveys we can mine data to its full potential to show what intersectionality is applicable, and also how when we use an intersectional lens, we can actually improve the targeting of our programs as well as reach those furthest left behind. So the toolkit provides guidance on mechanisms and tools that can be used, methodologies and assessment exercises, as well as how we can statistically manage and coordinate this process of intersectional analysis, as well as share various insights, learnings, and challenges that we have come across while promoting this work. Finally, Portia, who is one of the key organizers, or actually the key organizer of the Africa Gender Summit, has also teamed up with UN Women, and we produced a gender analysis toolkit for prioritizing SDG goals and targets. This toolkit is particularly aimed at academics, consultants, and policy analysts, and you will learn more about this toolkit in other sessions that will be presented during the course of this conference. But for now, I would like to wish you all excellent conference experience. Once again, apologies for not being able to be here in person, but I really wish you success with the rest of the Africa Gender Summit for 2023. Thank you.